On October 8, 1871, Chicago unarguably faced its most appalling disaster. A great fire aroused from the city's southwest side, and within hours, it was out of control. In the early hours of October 9th, the fire had spread north and east towards the city center. The great fire began in or around a bar owned by Patrick and Catherine O'Leary. It is believed that the blaze started when the family's cow knocked over a lighted lantern. However, this change has been dismissed and the true cause of the fire has never been determined. The fire destroyed an area of approximately 4 miles long and 1 mile wide, which included most of its central business district and many residential areas. The damage is still ghastly over a century later. Nearly 300 people died, 1,800 buildings were destroyed, 100,000 people were left homeless, property valued at $200 million was destroyed, and thousands were left unemployed. The fire was a huge devastation to the city. Many thought the aftermath of the fire would slow down the growing economy of the city, but they would later be proven wrong. After the fire, the city encountered a period of full renovation. The economy of the city rose, a fire code was put in place, and the city's business district flourished with new and better buildings. The city managed to do this because of its pre-fire economic momentum, commercial ties, and unique geographical location. There is no way the city could have failed to rebuild itself even if it tried. Chicago was home to more than 1,100 factories, commercial exchanges, wholesale houses, department stores, and the famous stockyards. Chicago was also the nation's greatest market for grain, meat, and lumber, with an increasingly significant role in the production of iron and steel and in financial matters. Resources were traded with other cities thanks to Chicago's railroad system, as it was the most important destination in the American railroad system. The railroad system received this title because the leading Midwest railroads were located in Chicago, which were the Chicago and Northwestern, the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific, and the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul. The city became known as the place where the manufacturing east meets the agriculture west. For the eastern roads, Chicago became known as the western end, and for the roads in the west, it became known as the eastern terminus. In 1871, the Union Stockyards managed to produce more than 3 million head of livestock, outranking Chicago rivals and finding success in the meat packing industry. At this same time, Chicago also managed to become the leading center in produce of corn. After the fire, reconstruction began almost immediately. It is said that the plans for rebuilding were put forward while the fire still raged on. Some accounts state that bricks were still smoking when they were stacked for rebuilding. The stockyards and the new packing plants in the south were left untouched. The industry surrounding agriculture kept the city alive. By October 1872, new buildings worth nearly $50 million had been erected. More than 10,000 construction permits were issued between 1872 and 1879. $316,220,000 were used in the construction of new buildings between 1871 and 1891. The economy in Chicago kept getting bigger and bigger, and the only way to expand was up as the price became astronomical between 1880 and 1890. Masonry construction limited that potential, and so a new architectural vision came to mind. In 1851, Henry Bessemer of England was working on a process for making steel. He then peddled his decarbonization process of utilizing a blast of air to make the idea his. This breakthrough opened the door for builders to start making taller and taller structures. One of those was William Lee Barron Jenney, an engineer in the Union Army who moved to Chicago in the late 1860s to take up a career as an architect and engineer. Kenny was appointed by the Home Insurance Company in New York to design a tall and fireproof building for their Chicago headquarters. He then had the idea of a design with an inner skeleton of vertical columns and horizontal beams made out of steel. This was in stark contrast to early structures, which were supported by heavy masonry walls. Steel was not only lighter than bricks, but it could carry more weight. With this new method of construction, lighter masonry walls could be hung, a bit like curtains from the steel frame. As a result, the walls of the building didn't need to be as thick, and the structure would be higher without collapsing under its own weight. Buildings with this type of frame could also have more windows, as the steel frame supported the building's weight, and stone or brick merely acted as a skin to protect against weather. In 1851 and 1885, the home insurance building was constructed with supports from masonry walls in the lower floors, apparently because of building commissioner requirements. But steel beams were used in the upper floors. It was the prototype of the skyscraper. Jenny's achievement paved the way for the work of a group of architects and engineers that would become known as the Chicago School. Lois Sullivan studied architecture at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris before stepping foot in Chicago in 1873. Sullivan was impressed by Jenny's previous works, most notably the 5-story Portland block which had been built in the past. After Sullivan noted the beauty about the building, he asked Kenny for a job. The Chicago School stated that a building should be designed and built for specific users and specific context. They also said the general office building was composed of subunits. These subunits were a basement for equipment, a common entrance for all tenants, a groundwork with large open rooms, infinite numerous of office floors, and an equipment attic to complement the basement. The job of an architect is to design and build a functional and pleasing building. Sullivan was an outspoken critic of the neoclassical theme of the World Columbian Exposition and implemented it onto the home insurance building. John Wellborn Root studied civil engineering in New York before he came to Chicago. In 1873, he and Daniel H. Burnham formed a partnership. Some regard their 9-story Montauk building as the first tall office building skyscraper in Chicago, although others claim that Jenny's home insurance building was the first of its kind. Whether or not the Montauk building was the first skyscraper, it doesn't remove the fact that Root and Burnham introduced 2 important innovations. They managed to make the Montauk block fireproof because the structural beams were covered by hollow tile. However, their most important innovation was the technique of reinforcing concrete with steel rays to construct a so-called raft when the building was constructed. This was called the rail grillage technique. It was part of the solution to constructing heavy buildings in the soil. Rail grillage then became known as superior to masonry footings. Masonry footings were unsuitable for taller buildings because in order to support the weight of the building, the footings needed to extend up through the basement and onto the first floor, thus causing an uneconomical loss of space. John Wellborn Root and Daniel H. Burnham introduced an idea that would allow buildings to be built taller. They played an important role in the coming of home insurance building because their idea helped Kenny design the building to be much taller and to have some sort of skeletal body. Root went on to design the Rookery, which was built in 1886. Root used the grill edge technique to minimize the space needed for footings. The building still stands today at 209 South LaSalle. Daniel H. Burnham joined the Chicago firm of Carner, Drake, and Wright as a draftsman in 1872. Just like other Chicago school architects, Burnham designed for other cities. He designed a Flatiron building located in New York in 1902. The building held the title of being the tallest in the world for a while. In 1890, Burnham became a chief of construction for the World's Columbian Exposition. He left his mark on Washington, D.C., Cleveland, and San Francisco. What many people thought would lead to the myth of Chicago would in turn create the opportunity for a new urban architecture design in Chicago that would spread across the nation. Several factors aided this transformation. The Chicago fire swept the ground clean. The need for office space in a physically circumscribed central district created a problem. The rise of land prices required architects to find new ways to build more cheaper. The growth of the steel industry provided the material and techniques. The creative vision of the architects of the Chicago School developed the skyscraper out of these needs and possibilities.